Hi, welcome to Translating Interview Speak. What your interviewer really wants to know, Chapter 13, our final chapter. What you're going to learn in this one is, first of all, next steps. We've done something fun in this. We took one of the characters in the book, Clueless Clark, and we went through what Clueless Clark learned and what you should learn from each one of the chapters. And then we also talk about what's next for you. So let's go through a quick summary of each of the chapters, thinking about what Clueless Clark did. We're Barbara Limmer and Laura Brown, and we want to help you get your next job. So, Chapter 1, Welcome to Interview Speak. If you remember, back to Chapter 1, one of the key things we talked about was be authentic and be prepared. Clueless Clark was a kind of person that thought he could just show up to interviews and just wing it and be himself. And obviously, we want everybody to be authentic and be themselves. But we really pointed out that we want to make sure you are authentic and prepared at the same time. Another thing we talked about was getting to know the interviewer in advance. And some people have told us, really, is it okay if I go on LinkedIn and check them out? Absolutely. They expect that you will look back on LinkedIn and find out information. Now, this doesn't mean that you want to dive deeply into it, but find out some general information. And another key thing that Clueless Clark got, and hopefully that you got out of Chapter 1, is the negative sandwich technique. This is such a key way to answer questions, where you start off with a positive, you have a negative in the middle, but then you end up on a positive. And another key thing Clueless Clark learned was to keep answers short, just 1 to 2 minutes, not to ramble. And again, that's another reason why we really emphasize prepare, 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 because by preparing, you can make sure that your answers only last 1 to 2 minutes and include the best information possible. Let's go on to Chapter 2, where we covered common questions and special situations. So Clueless Clark learned there are common questions. There are typical questions. Now, will you always get asked them? No, not necessarily, but chances are you'll get asked some version of some of these questions. So he learned to always be prepared for common questions. And what we want you to think about is consider what special situations might affect you and be prepared to address those questions. So a special situation might be that you haven't worked for a while, or you're trying to get a job in a new industry. So any of those special situations we list or that you think that you might get asked, be prepared for. And another key thing in this chapter that Clueless Clark didn't realize was you need to have questions ready to ask the interviewer. Clueless Clark thought, oh, if they ask me for what questions do you have, I'm not going to look smart or I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm doing if I ask questions. Absolutely not. Asking questions shows your interest in the job and can also show the work you've done, the background information you've looked at about the company. So make sure you have good questions to ask the interviewer. Chapter 3, we talked about interpersonal skills questions that you could be asked. And Clueless Clark learned that you can't just be general, you need to be specific. And that's why it's so important in your preparation to pick some really good stories and examples. And that way you can give a specific story and give details, and you have to end up with including results. It's not good if you just say what you did and why you did it. Then also talk about and what it meant to the company, the team, the customers, because then you can tie those results in to results you could get at this new company. Chapter 4, Perseverance Skills, Failures, and Negative Situations Questions. Clueless Clark did not want to take a look at this chapter because it talked about failures, and failures are really uncomfortable to talk about. But the fact is, that's why it's so important for you to prepare, because chances are, at some of the interviews, you're going to be asked about what your mistakes are, what your failures are, what problems you've dealt with. You need to be ready. And make sure you choose good examples that show what you learned and how those situations make you a better candidate now. And that's really the key. Then again, interviewers know that we all make mistakes, but you want to show I made the mistake before. I learned from it. I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to do a much better job here at this new company now that I had that learning.
So, chapter 5 was about leadership, hiring, and motivating skills questions. And Clueless Clark originally was not even going to focus much on this chapter because he didn't have a leadership title. But as he read on, he realized, wait a minute, he's led projects, he's had to interact with senior leaders, and the questions in that chapter really got him to think about how would he answer those kinds of questions and talk through how he led teams, even if they were informal leadership roles. Chapter 6 was about problem solving, time management, negotiation, and change questions. And these are things that we see all the time on job descriptions. And frankly, the way most people prepare is they look at the job description. It says, okay, must have excellent problem solving and time management skills. And they go, yeah, yeah, I have that. I know I'm really good at that. Well, Clueless Clark learned, and what we're telling you is don't just dismiss that knowing that those are strengths of yours. You actually need to pick examples and examples that are not easy, because if they're easy, they're not all that impressive. So we sound like a broken record here, but we just can't emphasize enough the importance of preparation. And as you think through which examples would I give if asked about these things, and they don't need to be the most difficult thing you've ever done, but they do need to include some sort of pain or obstacles or challenge, so that when you talk through that and say, here are the actions you took and here are the results you got, they sound a lot more impressive than just sort of glossing over what actually happened. Chapter 7 is where we broke out questions by job function. And we actually showed you what kinds of things you're selling when you're talking about these different functional areas, and possible questions you could be asked, so that you can think through what is the real question behind the question and what is the interviewer really looking for when they're probing these functional areas. And again, Clueless Clark, when faced with Chapter 7, he just kind of looked at the functions and immediately thought, well, I haven't had those job titles. But fortunately, he read through it and realized, yes, he had financial aspects to his job, operational aspects, technology related aspects. So he realized, whoa, these are questions I also need to be ready for. Chapter 8 is when we got into mistakes to avoid. And in this particular chapter, we talked about not doing your homework, not being real, or leaving without doing certain things. And what Clueless Clark got from this chapter, and what we want you to take away, is to make sure you're prepared for virtual interviews and on-site interviews, and you've checked your information in advance, both from a technical standpoint and for on-site interviews, directions and parking. At the end of the interview, close the sale by stating why you're a great fit. And don't forget to send thank you messages to all the interviewers. Chapter 9 talked about these mistakes: not hearing the question, the whole question, and the heart of the question. So, the takeaway from this chapter for Clueless Clark, and hopefully for you, is to listen to the entire question and then pause before answering. If it's a long, complex question, jot down some key words to help you stay on track. Don't ramble. Again, if you pause, you can think through which of your examples will best cover the whole question and the heart of the question, which, if you remember, sometimes comes at the very end of the question. So in chapter 10, the mistake we talked about was giving answers that sound good to you but aren't. Remember, we talked about using acronyms and industry jargon that your interviewer might not understand. And what Clueless Clark got from this chapter, his key takeaway was to connect the dots so that the interviewers really understand the impact of what he did. Prior to reading that chapter, he was so proud of what he did and why, but he left off the most important part, which is why it mattered. The other thing is make sure you answer the question, why should we hire you, from the company's point of view, not why you really need this job or you're really happy that this job is remote. That doesn't answer the question. Why should the company hire you as opposed to all the other candidates out there? And by the way, even if that question is not explicitly asked, you still need to address it because the whole point of your being there is to tell the interviewer why you're the best candidate for that job. Chapter 11 was where we talked about interview stages and translations of what interviewers might say before, during, and after the interview. So the key takeaways here that Clueless Clark got, and we hope you get, is that comments from interviewers can mean different things. And understanding the different stages can help you know what's next and can help you be prepared to sell yourself in those different stages. And then chapter 12 was how to deal with bad interviewers and really good ones. And this is where we talked about bad interviewers who might be following a script or might not be paying attention or might be really good interviewers and continually probe and interrupt. And that was where we talked about the transcript of Maya being interviewed by Valerie. And fortunately, deconstructing the job description helped Maya prepare thorough answers to potential questions. And when Valerie kept interrupting her, she quickly realized, wait a minute, I need to add more specifics to my answers so that they can be impactful. And this was all new to Clueless Clark as well. So that really had an impact on him when he read that chapter.
So let's go back to you. What's next for you? First, let's talk about what could hold you back. And a lot of times people get all excited about the ideas, or let's say the ideas that they just learned in this book, but then there's difficulty moving from ideas to action. So, a couple of things we want you to think about. Sometimes people get some motivation if they start to apply for jobs. Because if you know you're applying for jobs and you're starting to look, well, then that means you have to start working on interview skills. We also think that you just should just start working on interview skills right now. So whenever you get your next interview, you're prepared. If you're still stuck, ask yourself really what's holding you back and really think about that for some time. And the other thing you can do to help motivate you is ask yourself, what's your big why? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to get an interview? Do you want a better job? Do you want something that gives you higher pay? Do you want a better boss? So if you keep reminding yourself why you want to do this and go through this process and do the interview and get another job, it can help to motivate you. So how can you move forward? Well, one thing that can be helpful, and Barbara just mentioned it, was to practice deconstructing job descriptions. So take a job description and look at it, break it down to see what sort of questions they might ask. Then part of preparation should be picking stories and examples that really illustrate your accomplishments and include why did you do it, how you did it, the results, and then the most important, why it should matter to the interviewer at the company you want to work for. That's really what it all comes down to. And it comes down to why should they care? Why does it matter? And you really want to make sure that you make that clear. Now, another thing that can help, and we've talked to people about this, is getting an accountability partner. So maybe there's somebody that can help you that you plan to check in with every week or every 2 weeks, and they check in with you. Or maybe you send them emails letting them know that what you're doing. But whatever it is that you do, we want to make sure that this information helps you to start moving forward so you can get those interviews and get the job you want. Thank you so much for joining us for this series of videos. Please like and share. And before we go, we want to make a point here to say that these videos had some parts in it that we thought would be most helpful. We also want to point out that the Interview Speak book has so much more information. We've got a lot more examples. We've got checklists. We've got questions. We have so much more that can help you. And so we want to make sure that you take what you learned in these videos, but use it even more by getting the book. So if you haven't gotten the book, please go ahead and go to the publisher, Manning.com. You get that 40% discount. And if you want any more information, you can go to careercoffeebreak.com. Thank you so much for joining us for these videos. We hope all of this information has helped you to move forward so you can get the job you want. Thank you so much.